It was in 1986 when my wife was 50 years of age. Do the math and you can figure out when she was born. She decided that she would go on a trip to the West with her daughter. And so they got in our car and drove off, and we're gone. I don't remember how long, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. But I do know that I would get a call occasionally from Arkansas, where they had just taken off their shoes and socks and waded in a muddy field looking for diamonds. Or they were in Tennessee and happened to stop at a real country barbecue stand along the highway where an elderly African-American man made his barbecue, and my wife would report that was the best barbecue she ever tasted. Or when they were in Las Vegas and she said, "I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. They're just conning people who are walking around with deep delusions and illusions. They are moonstruck. They don't know what they're doing. They're getting their money taken away from them. And it's a phony place. I'm getting out of here as fast as I can." And then she and Lee, her daughter, went to Grand Canyon. And she ordered steaks at the bottom when they got there. And they began to walk down the wall of Grand Canyon on the path. And they went down there, and her daughter was relieved that they had ordered steaks so that they had plenty of food rather than some type of vegetarian meal. And then they were exhausted and they slept. The next day, using a different set of muscles, they came back up the wall of the Grand Canyon, the path of the Grand Canyon, and she called me and told me how superb it was and how they just happened to be going through an arch, a little bit of open cave on both ends, when it started raining so that she was not wet. It was a beautiful trip for her and her daughter. And I recall very clearly when she came back. Of course, I was thrilled to see her. And she said, "Frank," here's what she said, "I love my trip, and I know what is important to do in life. It is discovering, creating, and growing." 3 of those positive participles that I mentioned in a previous lecture. I was a bit shocked when she was giving me this declaration of what was important to keep doing: discovering, creating, and growing. But that became our motto. Wherever I have lived, since she gave me the magic formula, I have been on discovering trips. When we lived in South Bend, I explored along the St. Joseph River. We got in a canoe and we discovered how the river flowed up to Notre Dame and St. Mary's. We discovered cedar logs on the side of St. Mary's that were rotting, and we decided to rescue some of those, and she would hold on to that cedar log and I would just row as fast as I could. And when we got back to our property, I cut it up with a chainsaw and made steps back to the river. I also discovered, for instance, that there was 100 yards south of our home on the river, people had thrown garbage at the first half of the 20th century, and this was a marvelous little place. I guess the city did not know about it, or they would have made sure that there were no poisons leaking into the river. But it had all kind of interesting things, old bottles and that I would discover. And it had, in the same area, the ravines had cut, and there was one section of land, it couldn't have been 20 by 20, that the ravines had left as sort of a little island. And in the middle of that was an old dead cedar tree that I really loved. And so when we moved to Kentucky, I explored and discovered more stuff. And it was fascinating to see where someone had lived, and there were still jonquils coming up out of the earth in the spring. Or going over and discovering where two elderly sisters had lived and died. Their home had rotted away. And I kept thinking, you know, I know how they made money. They got paid 25 cents a day, 1/4, to top cotton, to top corn, and to chop around and make sure the weeds didn't kill the plants. And I wonder if they had a bag of 25-cent pieces hidden somewhere. I never did buy a metal detector to check it out. But I would discover beautiful rocks, fantastic twisted trees, dead walnut trees with great figure in them, that if a shotgun owner wanted to make a perfect stock, he would find the most beautiful ribbons of years on a walnut so he could make a walnut stock. I was not interested in making a gun, so I made a sculpture that showed their fight for life, because a walnut tree in this limestone area had to go everywhere it could go in order to survive, to stand up straight. And so I admired them. I thought it was a metaphor of human life, particularly the life I saw in psychotherapy, where people somehow would live despite horrific, abusive situations. And so I was discovering, and then you heard the word creating. I would take a walnut stump that had fought, and I would try and create, or I would create to my satisfaction and my wife's satisfaction and some people's satisfaction, something that was beautiful. And so discovering, creating, and growing was our motto. It remains our motto in Colorado in our senior years, because we're discovering every day. We discover sometimes in cold weather how the birds will flock and how they will fly, boom, 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 and coming up to our bird feeder. Or we'll discover the rabbits trying to find food. Or we saw some robins in February the other day. But we're discovering. And do we create? Well, we're creating these videos, but also we have plans to paint and to sculpt and to continue discovering, creating, and growing. And by the way, behind me with my friends, my community, I can always grow. All I have to do is pull down a book of Jefferson, of Leo Szilard, of Richard Feynman, who I don't think I'll ever master a lot of what he said in terms of physics or math. I know I won't. But there's somebody to teach me. There's Bettelheim who can teach me. There is, who can I name? All these people. I can keep growing no matter what happens to my body. So, there will be no book written or movie made like there was where at the end there's a sled that a guy says was Rosebud, the man who was fabulously rich, whose name I can't think of now, who owned a media empire and built a huge home in California. There's a story of him wanting power, and at the end of his life he said one word, Rosebud. And then you see a picture of a little wooden sled burned up in a fire as they get rid of his possessions. He missed being playful and living and loving and discovering and creating and growing in his last thoughts on this earth. But my wife and I, we have lived our Rosebud, and we encourage you to learn, to discover, to create, and grow. It is part of freedom after poisonous ideologies.